Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, January 31st, 2024, the last day of January. We're through a month of 2024 already. It doesn't feel like that. I don't know. I was going to say it felt like it passed rather quickly, but then things escalated quickly overnight. So, you know, many things to catch up on and many things to lament as we head into the election season. It is a Wednesday, but there were no primaries yesterday. We're waiting a little while longer for a couple more of those, which I guess just shows you what wild outliers Iowa and New Hampshire actually are. That's the lengths to which they'll go to remain first for no particular reason. Point of pride, I guess. It's not that that's no reason. It's just that it's not a particularly good one. But anyway, here we are. Okay. I said, we're escalating quickly. It was a joke yesterday, although it was a joke based on, real conditions. But now we're at, which way does it go again with the DEF CONs? Are we at DEF CON 1 now? With the war on Taylor Swift. Donald Trump has declared all-out war on Taylor Swift. I'm not really sure how this is going. I've been unable to click through. Unwilling to click through on any of these strange articles that are crossing my path, but apparently this is the case. I don't have one ready at hand, but I guess I ought to get one, or maybe Greg has got one. I would tend to doubt that Greg would waste his time with this, but it is a thing that's happening. It's not invalid, and a major party contender for the presidency is speaking out about it. So, I guess we have to pay attention to it somewhat, if only to monitor how crazy this is getting. But I guess Trump must have also been grousing to somebody that he's more popular, you see, than Taylor Swift, obviously. And so therefore, yesterday I think the joke was trying to come up with things that people thought were too crazy for even Republican MAGA wackadoodles to admit was behind their angry reaction, for whatever reason, to the Taylor Swift Travis Kelce story. I think the other day we were trying to, I was at a loss for the name of the football player who's the second part of this couple. And I think Greg at that point was off, had been done for a few minutes and passed me the last name, Kelce. And then I think, if I'm looking correctly at my notes here via Skype, gave me the name of Jason, and that didn't ring quite right, but it didn't ring quite wrong either, but as it turns out, his brother, Jason, is that right? Does he play for the Eagles? Is that what it is? I guess, I suppose, easily mistaken. Anyway, it's Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, and but today, the whole thing has developed into, they feel like they have real reasons here. And they don't, but they are also, I don't even know what to tell you about Republicans wasting their time on something like this. And why am I doing it too? But, right-wing Twitter and others, crazy, lunatic social media platforms, they're constructing all sorts of theories about this stuff. The reality is, this is cover for both of them because they're both gay, you see, and, it's insane. And right, bottom line is Greg is, saying, and as is, Justice, look, Trump has said he's angry about this thing, so they all have to be in on it. They all have to all go all in and be furious about this. At the same time, that'd be relatively amusing, except for the fact that I'm a little worried because as they're now screaming about things being all-out war. We read a little bit yesterday, Thomas Zimmer, maybe we should continue with that at some point, about their declarations of all-out war over the border and how concerning that is because, of course, it employs the mechanism of nullification of a Supreme Court declaration. But there's more and there's worse, and hopefully it's an outlier. There's always something outlying out there, but this too caught my eye. There's well, you know what? Maybe I should hold on to it because it's pretty crazy, and well, we'll see just how far we get with the documentation of the atrocities, and because there's a real atrocity out there now. I just happened to catch this story in the, I don't know, late evening, early morning. There's apparently somebody who has declared themselves a militia leader who is leading the revolution against what he calls the Biden regime, and as the first blow against the regime has murdered and decapitated a federal employee. It was his dad, so he had one conveniently at home. And I mean, I don't even know what to tell you about how crazy that is. There's always somebody out there that'll do something that may or may not be indicative of any larger movements or ideas, but I mean, wow, are we poisoning people with the rhetoric at this point? I can't think of a more extreme example. Hopefully that's the last one of its kind that we hear about, but I worry that it might not be. But anyway, there's many other things to catch up on. None of them great news for the country or the world necessarily, although maybe we can get to some sort of economic news, which might be good news for the country and the world for once. And all right, Greg Dworkin. Wow, how do you like to follow that up? Good morning. Thank you for the information on Travis Kelce. I think I'm caught up on the name of the players at this point anyway.
Yeah, although not entirely the story in the sense that
there's more.
They're not just declaring war, they're declaring holy war.
Yes, I thought that was an odd choice of words. I didn't know that there was anything particularly unholy going on here, but
right, and they'll take a Mike Johnson approach to it. You know, some reporter asked Johnson if he thought the Bible actually justified slavery. They asked his office.
Oh, I see.
That's his office question. Answered, Mike Johnson will never apologize for his Christian faith. That's going to be the answer they give to everything.
Well, yes.
Just
well,
your preprint.
Well, that's all right. They don't have to apologize for it necessarily. They just have to be defeated. So that's fine. I don't mind defeating people and having them not apologize. But it would be nice if they did. It's not Christian faith that he has to apologize for. And of course, nobody asked for an apology. So I guess that means, yes, the Bible justifies slavery. Or I don't know what they would say. I mean, there's slavery in it. I don't know if it justifies it. Pretty much says no, but okay.
NBC News has the story of this decapitation, and it's like even more wacky than you thought.
Oh, how could that be?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a Pennsylvania man, not a Florida man.
Well, that is unusual. It's
now he's arrested after allegedly killing his father and posting the decapitated head on YouTube.
Great.
But his dad was captain of the Middletown Township Police Department in Bucks County, Pennsylvania.
Well, a constitutional sheriff, almost.
The guy who did it says his father was a federal employee for 20 years.
Oh.
And refers to him as a traitor, but I don't know that he is.
Well, that's
I don't know
true.
much about anything.
I probably shouldn't take that guy's word for anything.
Right.
But, yeah, I mean, that was the excuse he gave for it. It would be something if he was also hallucinating that.
Well, you know, so more to come. I mean, that's obviously a breaking story. But declaring holy war against Taylor Swift, let's just say that's not good politics.
No. Yeah, I'd really like to get a hold of this.
We're also pre-prepping this. We're taking a preventative strike, which we're allowed to do by international law, because she may wind up endorsing Biden. Therefore, we have to do this.
Right. That's the natural progression of things. I think last time around, I don't know if she endorsed, but she put up a video or a picture on her Instagram of, didn't she host a party and had Biden cupcakes or something?
Well, she endorsed Biden.
That's an endorsement.
In 2020, rather.
Okay.
And so the whole idea that she will endorse Biden, actually she doesn't have to, because everybody on the other side said she did, and that's good enough. She was in their heads, so. and that's all we need.
Yeah.
But if you want to mobilize a youth vote, that's one way to do it.
Well, it's a weird thing to do. I would love to get a hold of this. I don't know, was there tape or anything of him saying he's more popular than Taylor Swift, which, again, it's,
I don't know.
It's elder abuse to let him roam around.
He also
like
added
that.
He's prettier and he could sing better,
Sure.
but he can do everything better because, like, he's a narcissist.
There's a song about that, right. Okay, well, it's an old song, but anyway, never mind. Show tunes. Anything you can do, I can do better. Great.
Pretty much, yeah.
All right, wonderful.
That's
love to hear him sing it.
Annie, get your gun.
Yeah. Can he sing at all? I have to think about how I could do a Trump
Not
singing
like Ethel
voice.
Merman.
Well, anything he could do, she could do better, obviously.
Right. Anyway.
Yes.
So much is going on.
That's one of the things.
My pundit roundup actually
let's look.
Starts with Nikkki Haley.
Mm-hmm.
I have a picture of feet. I have a picture of Nikkki Haley in heels and Ron DeSantis in heels, and you could argue about who does it better.
Oh, I was going to say that this is one of those things that Mike Johnson's internet blocker is not going to let us see, or that a different kind of okay. Well, it is weird. Feet, okay.
It's just feet,
Good.
So
covered and everything.
There's a two-parter here.
I heard that's a weird thing. Yeah.
They have the factual story on it, which is why it's so interesting for Democrats. Look, the campaign's over. Trump's going to be the nominee. That's not the point anymore.
Yes,
the point is when Haley gets out, which is sort of a minor point,
mm-hmm.
and how much damage does she do to Trump along the way, which is the major point. Because you have to remember the GOP cowardice way of taking
mm-hmm.
Trump on is to blame everything on Trump and Biden together, and that's what Haley will do.
I see.
But that's okay, because she's a Republican, and Republicans listen to Republicans. And so this is, for example, in the Washington Post, Haley camp seeks to convince top donors that Trump would cost the GOP the House, which is right.
Yes.
But if she tells donors that, do they slow down on giving Trump money for his it doesn't go to his campaign. It goes to legal fees.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, these days, I guess you could argue it sort of goes to E. Jean Carroll. So our big donors going to give money so that Trump could pay E. Jean Carroll.
Cool.
If I were pitching it for Haley, that's the way I would put it.
Oh,
what are you doing? What are you giving Trump money for? Don't you know where that money's going to go? It's going to go right in E. Jean Carroll's pocket. What are you doing?
That might work.
Well, that's the thing. So the question on the table isn't whether she loses the primary, and it's sort of a minor thing about whether she gets out. The question is how much damage does she do along the way? And so along those lines, Brian Beutler has a piece from Off Message. That's his website. This is why Trump is so desperate to end the GOP primary. He's winning handily, but he's in for a ton of bad news before Haley's last stand in South Carolina. And she's committed to staying in until South Carolina.
Okay. I mean, maybe it's just her ride home. I don't know.
Well, as Brian Beutler says, I'm not always right. The jury awarded Carroll a mere eight-figure number in damages.
I don't have
and
that.
He had predicted 9.
Oh.
So he's not always right. But then again, Arthur Engeron, who has a verdict in the civil trial against Trump's lying about his apartment's worth and trying to mislead banks.
Yes.
Engeron promised a verdict by late January.
This is it.
Today is the 31st, so I'm sort of expecting him to speak today.
I guess so. Is he aware of this?
Right. Yeah, he is. D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which is variously known as the Circuit Court or the Appellate Court, depending upon where you went to school. The decision there on rejecting Trump's claim to immunity for all crimes is also pending, but nobody knows when that's going to come.
Right.
So
predicting the last
Haley,
day of
as Brian Beutler puts it, still won't put it as bluntly as possible, still won't warn Republicans that Trump is a crook and end up justifiably imprisoned later this year, but she's moving in that direction. What she told Meet the Press on Sunday was, and I quote, and this is how the cowards do it, I absolutely trust the jury, and I think they made the decision based on the evidence.
They did.
But for a Republican, especially a Republican running for president,
yes,
that's a remarkable statement, actually. Yeah, it's a cowardice backdoor way to do it,
Yeah, just to say, as opposed to saying the fix was in, that's why the jury said what it said.
Well, how about, look, he's a convicted rapist. Do you really want to vote for him?
Oh, well, I mean, that's the Democrats' way of dealing with it. Or, well,
that's truth.
Yeah, right. Oh, I thought you were just saying that she was just finding
jury, and I
only
absolutely
way
trust the jury. She could say that.
Yeah.
And I think they made the decision based on the evidence. She could say that.
She did say that.
Yeah, it was just about it.
Would you say that? Okay.
It was about the amount.
Oh.
Right? But she could have been referring to the fact that he's a rapist.
Right.
Which the courts say he is. Don't yell at me.
They do say that. I don't know why, but they do. Yeah. So I don't know what's the point? I guess she must be thinking, I don't really want to go out on a limb. I'm not going to be the nominee. So what am I doing? Why am I inviting this trouble?
What she is doing is she's sort of circling the airport waiting for permission to land. And she's hopeful that by the time she lands, maybe something will have happened to Trump. One too many hamburgers, or the courts will have said something. Along those lines, I heard something on NPR, which I guess I was pointed to in terms of an amicus brief that was filed. And I can give you the whole brief, but
there's 350,000 of them. Which amicus?
This particular one was written with the help of a lawyer, ghostwriting lawyer, an amicus brief by history professors.
Oh yeah, okay. So we're talking about 14th Amendment one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this explains through congressional records and other writings at the time what the authors of the 14th Amendment's disqualification clause in Section 3 intended.
Oh, who cares?
And so many Civil War veterans on their Confederate side actually filed petitions with the U.S. government to not cover them under Section 3. Thousands of petitions filed with Congress by Confederate insurrectionists requesting that Congress remove their disqualification, and illustrates that the amendment was intended to be self-implementing and that no law or congressional actions needed to disqualify insurrectionists. They knew it, and that's how come they were petitioning.
So all we have to do is convince Trump that he should write
but the point is,
letter.
It's self-executing, and then the other side of it was, this was an insurrection, because those same law professor said, look, you're arguing about whether or not this was an insurrection. The Confederates, if you remember your history, got as far as Gettysburg. They never actually tried to sack the Capitol.
But
true. On January 6th, these guys did. How much of an insurrection? I mean, if you're saying this wasn't an insurrection, then you're saying that the Confederacy wasn't.
That's an interesting point. That was one of the many arguments made against Ross Douthat's weird article about this wasn't January 6th wasn't an insurrection because
he's paid to do so. He's not even worth reading.
No, but it was a weird thing that he came up with some sort of personal definition of insurrection,
which I doubt he did himself anyway.
And they pointed out, I forget who pushed back on it, but pointing out, but by the way, by this definition, I'm not certain there's ever been an insurrection. The Civil War might not even have been an insurrection because they didn't. Yeah, he threw in this weird condition that you had to try to not only try to sack the Capitol, but have plans to permanently hold the Capitol. Otherwise, it's not an insurrection.
Right. And then on NPR, while interviewing, I caught it right in the middle, so they didn't identify. I didn't hear them identify who it was. I can get that later when the show is up online. But I have the brief, and there's about 7 or 8 different history professors there.
Taylor
and the
Swift.
Interviewer on NPR said to one of them, a lot of people are saying, well, the proper way to deal with him is to defeat him at the ballot box. What do you say to that? And one of the professors said very simply, he was already defeated at the ballot box, and then he did an insurrection.
Yes, I'm not certain that helps you.
So, no, that's not the way to do it.
No, although I am in favor of seeing him beaten anywhere you find him.
Like a drum. But the whole idea is you can't, argue that all you have to do is defeat him at the ballot box and he goes away. He's proven not to be true. So beating him at the ballot box is necessary but not sufficient.
Yes.
And so, it was an insurrection. No, beating him at the ballot box isn't good enough. yes, it's self-executing. It's really well done. Not by law people, but by history people.
Well, they're closely related.
Well, they're textualists.
I mean, to the
history
extent
people
that,
have to be. You have to go back and you have to look at the text. It's all
yeah.
you have. You can't
well,
call up Abraham Lincoln and say, "What were you thinking?"
True. He does not answer the phone. For conservative
you can talk to Richard
textualists,
Nixon on X, but you can't talk to Abraham Lincoln. It's just not the way it works.
Conservative textualists will say this is the way you're supposed to conduct this inquiry. But it leads to our loss. Therefore, never mind.
Therefore, John Roberts will invent some new principle.
Mm-hmm. Somebody else once wrote something different. It was yesterday, but it was on old paper.
Chevron's already been used. We'll call it the Exxon principle.
Why not? I'm going to draw a lot of X's on this historical document.
We'll just make something up and we'll say, that's clearly what it said if you read it properly in a dark light, if you swim.
Right. In a hat.
Right.
So, okay. Well, that's a good one. I'd like to see that amicus brief. I love the point of all the conservative that too, sort of, I guess. Confederates writing in saying, I need Congress to remove the disability for me because I don't know. Most of them were probably, I want to take a post office job nearby and get a federal salary, but you need to remove my disability. Not only was it probably good proof of the self-executing nature of this thing, but how many things really are officers of the United States that you just might not have thought of. And probably including President of the United States itself, but I don't know. We have a weirdo one-off on that one. So, okay, that is interesting, right? If you nobody contacted these people and said, by the way, you're disqualified. They all just preemptively started writing to Congress, assuming they were disqualified because everybody knew they were Confederates. That's pretty good. All right, we'll have to take a look at that one. Let's give the rest of the week over to reading the entire thing. These briefs can sometimes be a little lengthy.
Yeah. I will mention, though, I do have the professors' names here.
All right.
And they include Alan Lichtman, the Keys to the White House guy.
Oh.
As well as Orville Vernon Burton, Nell Irwin Painter, who may have been the person I heard interviewed, James McPherson, Manisha Sinha, et al. So I don't know what et al. Is. Et al. Could be a lot of people.
He's the Israeli airline, I think.
Yeah, something like that. So interesting stuff. And
yes.
I think, they write it in plain English so that regular people like me can understand it who aren't lawyers.
Okay. Alan Lichtman. So you're saying keys to the what? I don't think
keys to the White House, the 7 keys. Like if you pass these, there's 17 keys or whatever it is.
Oh.
He has this weird prediction thing that if you check all the boxes, I'll tell you who's going to win the election.
I see. All right. Well, if everybody in America goes to the ballot box and checks a box, I'll tell you in 2 days who won.
Right. Exactly.
That's my version.
So here's the companion piece to the discussion we were having. This is Jamel Boy writing in the New York Times.
Okay.
If it walks like an insurrection and talks like an insurrection, ellipsis,
yes,
that's the title. And you know what? That's all you really need.
Yeah.
And then he's talking about some other amicus briefs. This one by Akil Reed Amar and Vikram David Amar. They argued that top of mind for the drafters of the 14th Amendment were the actions of John Floyd, the Secretary of War during the secession crisis of 1860 to 1861. He was basically stealing ammo as Lincoln's Secretary of War and giving it to the Confederates for stockpiling, just in case they needed to do some light treason later.
That's he wanted to heavy up
Buchanan
that light
actually
treason.
was president at the time, I guess.
Oh. Yeah,
Doug Buchanan administration.
So he was stealing ammunition out and passing it. All right. Well, that's
right. If Floyd was an insurrectionist, then the lawyers conclude Trump is obviously one as well. Certain inactions loom especially large when a current officer with special obligations to affirmatively thwart other insurrectionists instead sit on their hands, smiling as chaos erupts around them. And that's precisely the case of Donald Trump.
Okay, that's an interesting one. People are rediscovering a lot of lost historical figures. It's good.
It's great, and these professors actually pointed out one of the reasons that they were asked to do this, one of the reasons they feel like they're obligated to do this, is that the 14th Amendment, Section 3, all of that's been lost to history. People don't pay attention to it anymore. It disappeared. It's been ghosted.
Yeah, well,
and so you have to go back and say, no, this is there. It's part of the Constitution. You can't just like ignore one part of the Constitution because you haven't used it.
Yeah, I mean, this happens a lot, and people rediscover these things at later dates. People will go back and read carefully about what was it about the president and vice president had to be from two different states. I vaguely recall. One day that'll come up. People remember these things exist, but yeah, I'm glad it's a good lesson in history. And look, I'm not the only one running around anymore saying William Belknap was impeached after he left office. This is good to have people researching these things.
Right. And then Bowie mentions this other first amicus that we talked about with the historians of the Civil War and Reconstruction.
There are a lot of these
who point out that they clearly believe the president was, in fact, an officer of the United States.
Of course.
And this was most apparent during the 1868 impeachment trial of Andrew Johnson, which members of Congress routinely characterized president as constitutional officer.
Yeah.
Electors may elect the president and vice president, but the Senate only can remove them, said John Sherman of Ohio. The president and the Senate can appoint judges, but the Senate can only remove them. These are the constitutional officers, and their tenure and mode of removal are fixed by the Constitution. Yes. So at the time, they clearly saw president as officer.
Yes, everybody did,
stuff from these amicus,
except that one judge. And she was just kidding. But look what she started. I know that was a little bit dangerous on her part, but okay. I understood the game. And I guess she figured, well, this will be set right in 10 seconds. Of course, he's an officer. But here we are. Look, in the age of war on Taylor Swift, I guess, you just can't start a rumor that the MAGA people can latch onto and then dislodge it that easily. So it's going to take
more
15
on that after the break.
Amici briefs. All right, and even Don Amici.
Don Amici.
Yeah, he's got one himself.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue with, I don't know. I think we're done with the, are we done with the amicus Amici brief or no?
We're never done with the Don Amici brief. So we're never even done with Taylor Swift.
Oh.
Because, as you may know, there are now these weird conspiracy about Taylor Swift. It's not just holy war. She has a concert in Tokyo. But in order to get back to watch the Super Bowl, she's going to have to cross the international date line. And that opens up a black hole, and then that makes everybody, weird, So how's she going to get back in time? Is it a body double, or, is Trump really singing in Tokyo, and it's Taylor Swift at the game, and what's really going on here?
I mean, she's a jet, yeah.
There's a lot of weird stuff. And once that black hole opens, everything gets sucked in. You know who's getting sucked in? Alina Habba. How do we know? Because Trump announced on Truth Social he's looking for another lawyer because he's not happy with the verdict.
I thought he was looking for a threesome. But never mind that. She's terrible. She got herself in trouble again in the last couple of days. We didn't even get a chance to mention it before it collapsed, but I guess
she did a Nevermind. Yeah,
she came up with a theory. Somebody fed her a theory that E. Jean Carroll's lawyer was mentored 30 years ago at a big New York City law firm where Judge Engeron was working. at the time was a partner, and that he was her mentor, and so therefore unfair, mistrial, et cetera, et cetera. And then, as it turns out, they were there at the same time. He, a senior partner, she, a brand new junior associate. Their paths never crossed. She had an actual mentor. It was someone else. There was nothing to it.
But that's besides the point. Basically what she's claiming, and rightly so, is that prominent lawyers in New York City and any other place know judges.
They do know judges. They are sometimes
and they know
become
each other,
judges.
And they've met, and they've actually spoken with each other over the course of 30 years.
Yes.
I don't know if you knew this, but it's absolutely true. How could you deny it?
I have heard such things. She may not be familiar with this whole weird place where we call the Supreme Court, where people who clerk for the justices then come back and argue before the justices and say, hey, how you doing? It's been 15 minutes. Can I have a judgment on my case, please?
Yes, and Clarence Thomas doesn't say, well, obviously I disqualify myself because you're my clerk, and you're my clerk, and you're my clerk, and you too.
Everybody in front of them is a clerk. That's the circle of people who get hired to argue cases in front of the Supreme Court, people who just got out of there as clerks.
Yeah.
But yeah, all right. And as it turns out, so she was completely wrong about the relationship, but of course filed a fiery motion for a mistrial, saying
and
that
an even
this was
more fiery
outrageous.
motion was filed in response, because that's what lawyers do, by Robbie Kaplan, no relation to the judge, who said, if you proceed with this, I'm going to start sanctions. And Armando wrote, you can't do this as a lawyer. You could be disbarred.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not sure why. I don't know the lawyer ins and outs of this, but I suppose you're not supposed to be attacking a judge. It's probably not good form. If you ever want to argue.
Well, I think, you can certainly do that. You can argue about whether a judge should be disqualified or a mistrial. I mean, that's not the problem. The problem is making frivolous claims like that without any sort of
I based
evidence.
it on an anonymous source in the newspaper.
Right. And
in
as
fact,
it turns out,
she based it on an anonymous source in the New York Post.
That's true. And then I heard, here's an anonymous source, that the writer of the piece in the Post tipped her off to it, that he was going to write that. So she started work on her motion, and then out comes the article, and then she claims to the judge, I heard about it from the article, but as it turns out, I actually heard about it earlier.
But you know what the funny part is?
This article was written to bolster my case.
Well, I don't know if this actually happened, but this is what should have happened.
Yes.
Judge Kaplan should have stared over to her and said, sit down. That's not how you present evidence.
Yeah, that's also true.
Because he's done that.
Yeah. Right, and I got the judge wrong. I forgot about that. It's Kaplan, and I'm surprised they didn't come up with this theory earlier, because Carol's lawyer's last name is Kaplan, and so is the judge's name, and that didn't occur to them sooner. Right. But still, they would have come up with some sort of theory.
For everything Paul Waldman writes.
Right, exactly, which is fine with me, actually. We're doing pretty good. I'll take Michael, Paul, and there are probably a few others as well. So so far I haven't run into any problems with the things that they've done that I'm worried about being confused with them.
Right. Anyway, so things are not really going all that well for Trump in a legal sense, except for the fact that the circuit/appellate court hasn't decided yet, so that's delaying things. Everybody thinks that the Florida lawyer is just going to delay things forever. He'll get convicted eventually, but it's not really clear it's going to matter in terms of the election. January 6th is still the thing, and it's going to get discussed one way or the other. But all of this matters. I mean, the reporters who talk to voters say, I don't like the idea that, Trump is getting convicted of these things. And being convicted, being liable for rape is a big deal.
Sure, no one
wants that. And if Nikkki Haley says, I believe the jury, that's a big deal. So, that's all going to sink in. And as we talked about on the show on Monday, it's important that Haley say it, because otherwise nothing gets past into the right-wing bubble. So it's important that she says stuff like that.
Okay.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the non-existence of congressional work product. They've done two things rather than actually help the country in any way, shape, or form. One thing is that they're trying to impeach Joe Biden because he has a son named Hunter who has some issues. That's not going all that well. And James Comer, the head of the committee who's leading that charge, looks like a fool. So that's been put on the back burner. They've decided to impeach somebody else.
Sure,
because the whole idea is you have to impeach somebody because Trump was impeached.
Right.
It's an imperative on the Republican Party. It's got nothing to do with facts or deserving or anything like that. So they're going to go ahead. They had a whole meeting yesterday, a long meeting, where they were trying to put together articles of impeachment for Secretary Mayorkas.
Yes.
Because he's doing his job and they don't like that. And the stuff he's doing is sort of interesting. I mean, he's talking to Mexico about, because without Mexico, there is no solution to how many people come to the border. And the overwhelming numbers mean whatever policy you have is not going to work properly until or unless you control the number of people that come. And there are cartels who are paid to bring people there. So there's always impetus to have people show up. So all of this is going on, and while Secretary Mayorkas is meeting with the Senate trying to fix this with a bipartisan bill that may actually be released this week with James Langford and Chris Murphy working on it, along with Sinema, the House has decided that it's in the best interest of the Republican Party to keep this as an issue, and even though it's a crisis at the border, it can wait until after the election because it's that kind of crisis. Of course, I would remind you, need no reminding, but I would remind our listeners that Ed Gillespie was the governor of Virginia based on the strength of caravans as his advertising. Or actually not. He lost because it didn't work. And there's plenty of articles about how Democrats are flipping the script on the Republicans and saying, we're going to run on you claiming that it's a crisis and then doing nothing about it. And we're going to make it a political issue. And it's not going to be helpful to you.
Oh, no.
So while this is going on, this is from Ian Sams. In the middle of the night, Chairman Green, who's heading the committee that's looking at impeaching Mayorkas, I don't think they leave it to Comer anymore, shut down amendments to the Mayorkas impeachment articles, wouldn't let them submit them for the record, effectively blocking history from a full accounting of this unprecedented stunt. So it's a sham process, and they're making it a sham process. And our congressional expert Ringwist looks at this and said, that feeling you learn about the previous question. So in the dim recesses of my mind who don't understand these things, I looked at this and said, does that mean that the Democrats will raise something about the previous question because if the previous question is defeated, then you get to open it up for amendments or something like that? I can't quite put the picture together. It's fuzzy.
Yeah, well, I mean, usually in that context, with rules, when they're considering a rule on the floor,
they can't pass rules.
Yeah, right. Well, that's one of the reasons that they can't, is you bring something to the floor usually with a special rule governing its debate. But if you defeat the previous question motion when you're considering a rule, that would open it up to amending the rule on the floor.
This might come as a rule because this is one thing Republicans agree on. Yeah.
That's true. They might be able to get that. I mean, I don't know. I'm not certain exactly where Ringwist was going with that one, unless it was. It's possible that may have been a motion under the rules of the committee to move the previous question so that they could stop amending the impeachment articles. But there's a slightly different take on it. But
I'm giving you a foreshadowing because I think it's going to come up. At least it's going to come up as discussion about the tools that Democrats can use, from discharge petitions to bringing up the previous question. These are all things that you do when you're in the minority that usually don't work, but sometimes that's all you have.
Yeah, and when the margins are thin, it sometimes pays to do something like that. Occasionally, you can get somebody embarrassed or catch them away from committee.
There's a couple of things that happened that were sort of non-germane to politics. Nobody really cared, but there were actually some moments in the past couple of days where Democrats outnumbered Republicans in the chamber.
Yeah, well,
that's how thin their margin is.
Okay, right. I mean, somebody's out, they're sick, they missed their flight, they have a meeting. It's not always
boring,
the case
and they don't want to show up.
Well,
they're sick.
Too.
They're indicted. There's a bunch of stuff.
Oh, yes, that's true too. Yeah, I should read a little bit about that. I mean, I'm sure they had a contentious meeting in the Homeland Security committee yesterday, and that's where they're considering the impeachment. Comer was head of the investigation, anyway, into what was supposed to lead to impeachment because, they moved that over to government oversight. Although, again, I'm not certain why. They have Jim Jordan parked at Judiciary. Ordinarily, when we hear about major impeachment motions, it usually has to do with the president, and they handle it in the Judiciary.
Jim Jordan is all about taking his shirt off and jumping on the table.
Yeah.
This actually required writing something and making it sound official, and Jordan's not that good at that kind of thing.
So, as it turns out, Comer was no better, and so they're going, I guess, to the third string. It makes sense, I guess, to deal with the inquiry in the Homeland Security Committee, where they deal with what the Homeland Security Secretary presumably has been doing this whole time. But we'll see whether they're any more efficient in getting this through. I guess they've decided they're going to do it, whether they have legal basis for it or not. It should be a relatively efficient process. Just do it because we said so. But I guess it's giving them a headache, and it's lasting all night, and people are insisting. It's interesting. Republicans getting angry because Democrats are insisting on reading every amendment out loud, and they think that that's some sort of a waste of time. But it's like, it's an impeachment inquiry. Don't you think the articles of impeachment should be read aloud and we could decide on that?
No, this is the Trump train. Get on board. Stop trying to slow the train down.
Yes, that's essentially what's happening here.
Right. That's where, in a previous era, the opposition party would start making railroad noises,
Yeah.
Choo choo.
Exactly.
You're railroading us into doing this quickly.
Yes. Choo-choos will not replace us, they'll say now.
Yes, well, maybe they will. So, speaking of replacing, did we talk on the show on Monday about the protests that were taking place in Germany?
Yes, you did mention
them. So it's made its way into
Germany.
the English news, and I have a follow-up on that, which I thought was really quite interesting.
All right.
This is the New York Times today. Germany has finally woken up.
Oh, dear.
The author, Ms. Sauerbrei, is a German journalist who writes about Germany's politics, society, and culture. She wrote from Berlin.
That's
and they're talking about the report that came from an organization called Corrective, Correctiv.
Okay.
There were several politicians from the far-right party, Alternative for Germany, Alliance for Germany, AfD, Alternative for Germany is their English name, discussed plans for the mass deportation of millions of foreigners and Germans from migrant families. Horrified, over 2 million people have since taken to the streets. The protests, some of the country's largest in decades, emerged everywhere, not just in liberal cities like Berlin and Hamburg and München, but also in many cities in eastern Germany, like in Saxony and Thuringia, where the far right is particularly strong. The strange thing was that the Corrective report told us nothing we couldn't have guessed already. The far right, we know, is built on racist fantasies of ethnic homogeneity, and the AfD has long been deemed extreme. But for years, many Germans viewed the rise of the far right with something like worry detachment. Yeah, they got to about 20% in the polls, but there was some complacency about the threat it posed. Not anymore. Germany, alas, has woken up, and it's this report that did it.
Oh.
Okay, well, and so I have the actual report from Corrective, Secret Plan Against Germany, and they talk about how they went to the hotel where this meeting was taking place, how it was funded by far-right extremist rich people, wealthy people, the kind of people that show up at Davos.
I guess so. Yeah. Is this an outgrowth of the weird plot involving the one of 13 princes with the same name sort of thing?
No,
or different?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Maybe.
Hard to tell if they're connected.
What the Corrective report says is with only 10 months to go until the regional elections in the German states of Thuringia, Saxony, and Brandenburg, this meeting has shown that racist attitudes extend into the highest echelons of the AfD party.
Oh, no.
Just leave Bach out of it, that's all. Don't go there with Johann Sebastian Bach. Leave him out. And it doesn't stop with attitudes. Certain politicians want to put their racist ideas in action, despite the fact that AfD firmly denies it's a right-wing extremist party. In fact, there are moves to make them illegal. And they protest and say, we're not right-wing. But there's a meeting that said what they want to do is they want to deport people.
This is Jonah Goldberg's fault.
These revelations could be highly incriminating for the AFD, given the context of recent debates about whether the party should be banned, says the report. As a threat to the country's democracy, at the same time, it gives a sinister glimpse into what could happen should the AFD ever come to power. It's like Project 25.
I guess. 25.
The plans that were drafted on the weekend in Potsdam are nothing less than a fierce attack on the German Constitution itself. And then it gives details. Who was there, pictures, the invitations from the Dusseldorf Forum, as the group is calling itself, talk of an exclusive network and a minimum donation of, looks like 5,000 euros. Raising funds is a core task of our group. They're actively pursuing the goal by soliciting money from wealthy business people who want to support far-right alliances in secret. Once at the meeting, the event organizers would announce a neutral bank account, or the donation could also be paid in cash.
GoFundMe.
GoFundMe. This is a word that should chill you. The purpose of the donations is hinted at in the invitations, which are signed by the organizers, the rich dentist, the former shareholder to some catering company, rich industrialists. Another copy of the invitation seen by Corrective, one of these guys talks of, quote, an overall concept in the sense of a, you ready? Master plan.
Oh, does that have a history in Germany?
I believe it does. The master plan will be presented. He proudly announces by none other than Martin Sellner, the longstanding leader of the far-right identitarian movement. Anybody who attended this weekend in the hotel knew what this was all about. And it's a master plan to rid the country of immigrants.
Wow. Well, no wonder they're alarmed and protesting in multiple cities.
That's why they're out there. But this is really explosive.
Okay. Yeah, Germans, they just can't give it up, I guess. Or at least 20% of them just can't give it up.
Yeah. Or as Tom Lehrer was fond of saying, they taught us a lesson. We taught them a lesson in 1918, and they've hardly bothered us since then.
All right. Well, secret plan against Germany. Well, it notes here that the article is also available in
Susan
Turkish.
Collins says, I hope they learn their lesson.
Yes, right. I'm deeply concerned about this failed painter from Austria.
So, big deal. It's a big deal, and people should pay attention. And when you hear about it, that's what's going on.
All right. Keeping an eye on it. We need to send Taylor Swift over there, I guess. Sounds familiar for both them and us.
Yeah. Anyway, why somebody is normal for a celebrity as Taylor Swift is a focus of their ire is unclear, other than that she's really popular and she likes Biden.
I don't know. Although I did see someone saying, and I have, I recall the same thing, that they may just be very angry because there was a period of time a couple of years ago, I'm losing track of time, exactly how many years ago, I don't know, where I would see very frequently on Twitter from right-wing nutballs. They were pretty sure that, I guess before she spoke out in favor of Biden or became sure enough of herself and her status to speak out politically in any capacity, they were pretty sure she was going to be an Aryan queen for them, essentially, that she was super white and super blonde and she was Southern and she sang country or vaguely country-ish music, and they were pretty sure she was going to be an Aryan prototype racist for them. And then it turns out that she was normal and didn't want that to happen. And they feel very betrayed by this somehow.
Well, here's the article from Rolling Stone about pledging holy war against Taylor Swift. And as our friend Dana Vold points out,
gospel.
Pledging holy war against Taylor Swift, nobody's misread the American public that badly since Terry Schiavo.
Maybe, although I was going to say the last couple years of Republican insistence that they were going to boycott the NFL and Bud Light and I don't know what else, like that seemed like a pretty bad misreading as well. It just didn't amount to much. And Dana may be right in terms about impact, though. Okay. Taylor Swift, she's going around the country having rallies. Around the world, in fact, and 100,000 people will attend.
Well, she signs people up to vote is what she does.
Yes, and there are really seismic events wherever she goes, like literally seismic events. You told me that, too, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. So our friend Brian Beutler at Off Message also has a comment about Taylor Swift, and he says, there's nothing terribly interesting underlying the bizarre freakout. Swift has millions of devoted fans and is also a liberal who endorsed Biden in 2020. Since this year's election is shaping up as a rematch, she's likely to endorse Biden again.
Yeah,
again, after this, she doesn't have to. If that's interesting for any reason, it's because it exposes the intentionality behind the big lie. The same propagandists who apparently fear Swift's mobilizing powers also claim Trump won in 2020. But if their rigged election conspiracy theories were sincerely held, they wouldn't fear that Swift's endorsement might make Biden unbeatable. Because, according to them, Biden's already won.
I guess. I'm at a loss to explain it. Really don't know what to tell you. Ordinarily, nothing. There's nothing ordinary about this. This is just insane. And it may just have been a mistake at some point for Trump to have mentioned it, because now they all think they're doing him a big favor, that they're showing their loyalty to him by joining in it. And it was insane. They should have ignored it.
Right.
And again, the kids, Ivanka, honestly, you can't just let them continue to run around like this.
Anyway.
You're going to lose your inheritance. It's all going to E. Jean Carroll because you wouldn't lock him up.
That just goes to show you don't trust anybody over 30. Except Taylor Swift is over 30, I think.
Yes, I believe so. And that's part of the point of contention. The right-wing manosphere is trying to explain it all away by saying Travis Kelce is he's walking into a trap. He doesn't understand that she's...
what?
Various things. Too old to...
Middle-aged and frumpy? Is that what they're claiming? Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's the claim. These guys are insane. I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, they're pretty sure the whole thing is pretty gay somehow, and that's bad, obviously, for them. And did you know that she only has a couple of years left to have children? Because that's obviously, for these guys, I guess, who were raised on believing that she was going to be some sort of Aryan queen breeder for them. I guess that's of concern. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. They think they can win this one, and I don't know why. They really just should have said, the old man's crazy. We're not listening to him on this one. Well,
again, for people who really think it's important to go to West Virginia diners because there are 73 million people that voted for Trump, and it's really important you understand them, I would argue at this point, no, it isn't.
Yeah.
A pretty good idea
guess
of why
not.
they're doing.
Yeah, really. Being led down this path and agreeing to follow him on this. I don't know about these pictures that they keep running of Taylor Swift. I keep seeing her in this particular shot. Was this her most recent concert or something? I don't know what this costume was.
She's obviously on tour. I don't think she dresses like that at home.
No, ordinarily no. She's got a microphone in her hand. She's clearly on stage. I just don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But what do I know? Who cares?
In any case,
doesn't matter whether I
me.
think it's worth anything. Okay. That's all right. We can accept that it's quite near an hour. So well done there again. Our 20-minute segment once again, expanding to 50. All right, we got to keep an eye on this. I guess
today, boys and girls, we learned about amicus briefs, Don Amici briefs, and then we also learned quite a bit about secret plots in Germany.
Yes,
and quite a bit about historians looking at the 19th century, the 1860s, and what was going on at the time.
Right.
And this is stuff you should learn in school.
It should be happening, but maybe it's
just
banned.
Like congressional members should learn things like I'm just a bill and how things pass.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to have to keep an eye on Congress because the Senate is actually in its slow, methodical way doing what the Senate does. And it's really going to be interesting to see what happens in the House when they get something that they're going to have to deal with, which they hate doing. They only like messaging. They only like posturing. When you actually ask them to do something, they fall apart. That's not an exaggeration.
No, not at all. And we've seen it happen in the last couple of weeks with relatively minor legislation that they just cannot get moved onto the floor. We'll have to see what sort of procedure they come up with for moving a contentious impeachment to the floor. I mean, ordinarily, they should just be able to muscle it if they were just going to swallow their pride and say, I don't care that I look ridiculous, I'm going to do it. But there's a real question of whether or not they're going to be able to muster more Republicans than Democrats on the floor on any given day, and they don't know how to count that yet, which is amazing. But, yeah, I mean, maybe that would be okay for them to move the impeachment get the report that this was happening and then have him narrowly escape impeachment by a vote or two. I don't know whether they would consider that to be a victory, like in the warning shot style, or whether they would think that that was some sort of major defeat. I don't know. And I don't know how to spin it either, because it's a major defeat in that you wanted it and you couldn't get it, and you should be able to muscle it through. But then again, it was substanceless and you didn't do any work to get it where it got, so it's maybe a throwaway defeat. I don't know. Well, we'll see how it's spun. And I don't know. I guess we'll ask Taylor Swift and she'll tell us what to think about it. All hail our new queen, I guess.
Right.
I'm going to learn a song.
Yes. Well, as reporter Jacob Rubishkin points out, it's true. Taylor Swift endorsed Biden in 2020 and saw her popularity plummet. Hardly anybody's seen or heard from her since.
Right. She got Dixie chicked right out of the country.
Yeah.
Yeah, she should tour with them. Put them on her tour.
Right.
That'd
absolutely.
be something. I mean, I don't know how they get along.
I have no idea.
Anyway,
that's it for me. Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay, very good. Yes, that gives us one more shot at the balance of the week. We'll see you on Thursday, and I'll try and sort out.
Maybe we'll have an Engeron decision.
Maybe. Maybe probably won't have that
circuit appellate decision.
Yeah, probably not. That was the one that we were worried that some judge could. There's no time limit on it. She could take as long as she wants. I believe it was a woman judge but I'm not positive that was.
Yeah, that was a G.W. Bush judge. But
the
thing is, maybe she's just taking her time to write it properly so that it doesn't get dissed by the Supremes.
Right. True.
These things take time.
Right, you can't tell. It's not been that long, but
These
people were hoping for
briefs
dispatch.
Were not written overnight. It took a while to put them together.
Right, which brings us to a discussion of Rome, the ancient empire of Rome, which I think conservatives say we should be thinking about every day. So
no,
good.
Sparta. They want you to think of Sparta.
Okay. We'll catch up with you tomorrow then. Gives us another hour at a shot of all these things, and presumably the Taylor Swift thing will have resolved itself by tomorrow, and we'll tell you how it turns out, everybody.
Yeah, we know how it turns out. Carthage must be destroyed. Take care. I'll talk to you Thursday.
Okay, very good. And we'll be back in 1 minute with some new angle on all of this, and a dive into Pocket to see what goes best with decapitations and Taylor Swift. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see if we can't, I don't know, if we're going to be able to figure out exactly what everyone's good Twitter friend Ringwis was talking about with the previous question comment. Maybe I should open that, if I could find that comment and see, was there more in a email thread about it. I might be able to figure out a little bit better what was going on, but I should be looking at what he's been posting about, just to see if I can answer that question any further. But he said, okay, that feeling when you learn about the previous question, that was in reference to the Ian Sams tweet about, which read that in the middle of the night, Chairman Green, that's Mark Green of Tennessee, I think, the chair of the Homeland Security Committee, here he is with his head in his hand. In the middle of the night, Chairman Green shut down amendments to the Mayorkas impeachment articles, wouldn't even let Dems submit them for the record, effectively blocking history from a full accounting of this unprecedented stunt. Certainly difficult to understand why you wouldn't even be able to just submit your amendments for the record. But let's see, Ringwest going on to say, 12 hours of debate, I guess that's how long they were in session in the committee, is incredible in the House of Representatives. On the floor, there will be nowhere near that much debate, and certainly no amendments will be made in order. That's almost certainly true. They're not going to allow amendments to the articles of impeachment on the floor. But I do have a roll call report from mid-evening yesterday, I guess before they had finished things out. And I did open up the C-SPAN video of the hearing just to see if there was any clue about a fight over the previous question, but I don't know if I have any specifics. But here's the report from yesterday evening House panel consideration of Mayorkas impeachment lasts all day. A partisan clash over the GOP push to oust the Homeland Security head, filed by Sean Michael Newhouse yesterday at about 6:20. The House Homeland Security Committee began consideration Tuesday morning, just like Joan McCarter told you yesterday, of a resolution to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, but appeared to be nowhere near a final vote more than 8 hours later. And I guess they went 12, and I don't know what happened. Did they have a vote? The measure would impeach the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, leader for what it calls a willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law and breach of public trust. And the markup Tuesday allowed a partisan clash to play out at the committee. Chairman Mark E. Green, there we are, of Tennessee, before a dinner break, indicated those clashes likely aren't over. We want to give you guys an opportunity to go get fed and be ready because I think it's going to be a long evening, Green said. House Republicans argued Tuesday that Mayorkas had abused his authority to grant humanitarian parole to migrants and flouted requirements to detain those who cross the border illegally. We cannot allow this border crisis to continue. Oh, this is good. We cannot allow fentanyl to flood across our border because if they do, then it will end up in the White House pharmacy and the Donald Trump staff will steal it, which happened. Anyway, we cannot allow fentanyl to flood across our border or criminals to waltz in undeterred. We should absolutely waltz with them so that they are deterred. No one wants to dance with us. And we cannot allow a cabinet secretary with no regard for the separation of powers or the rule of law to remain in office, Green said in his opening remarks. What's wrong with his view of the separation of powers? The articles also alleged that Mayorkas knowingly made false statements to Congress about the security of the border and has failed to comply with multiple subpoenas from committees. And this is, again, probably a situation in which, like dealing with a 5-year-old, you said we were going to have ice cream. Well, I said we would have ice cream if you finished your dinner. You're a liar. Right? If you give a different opinion when they've concluded that you're a traitor and are committing treason and there's open borders and you say, actually, doing my best, it's a hell of a situation, but no, we got nothing like open borders. But I both read in the newspaper and have said that we do have open borders and you're saying that we don't. So you're a liar. You've lied to Congress and I'm impeaching you. Doesn't really work that way, but you can try to make it work that way, but then you end up with a fiasco, and before you know it, you're in a holy war with Taylor Swift. Committee Democrats labeled the markup a political stunt, and, well, the whole thing is a stunt, and that Republicans' justifications for impeachment were flimsy. That's what makes it a stunt. Mayorkas has faithfully implemented the administration's border policies. Policies Republicans apparently disagree with, but policy differences are not impeachable, Ranking Member Benny Thompson of Mississippi said. Now, of course, Republicans have said that in the past, too. They say things like that every time we get near or actually do impeach a Republican official, and they say, you're just disagreeing with policy. Policy differences are not impeachable. Well, some are, I guess, like if you are torturing people, for instance, in violation of policy, that might be impeachable. That's true. Or if you are trying to extract personal payoffs and bribes in the conduct of our foreign policy for your political benefit, that's a policy difference, but it's one that carries the possibility of impeachment. Or it's just a policy difference. You say these are the correct Electoral College certificates, and we say those are the correct Electoral College certificates. We wrote the other ones, and we made them on Photoshop, but that's our policy, you see. And so you can't impeach us for a policy difference, besides which he's not even in office anymore. And he never was, because he was never an officer. How do you like that? All right. Well, anyway, the markup became contentious from the start when Thompson made 4 motions about procedural matters, such as requiring the impeachment resolution to be read aloud, and a point of order that a substitute amendment from Green was not germane. Republicans blocked each of the motions on party line votes. I mean, that's what you'd expect to happen whether they were valid or not. They would be blocked on party line votes. But how do you like that? They actually had to try and vote to block the request. We're going to impeach the Secretary of Homeland Security on charges bordering on treason. Okay, what are those charges? I'm not going to tell you. Well, I demand that they be read aloud. Well, we vote no. Really? Okay. Although it was just one line. Oh, wait a minute. I skipped something here. So they blocked each of the motions on party line votes. The panel spent most of the first hours debating that Green amendment with breaks for members to vote on the floor. Right? They had other things going on the floor. They had to break up the committee meeting every once in a while to go do those votes. By the end of typical business hours, the panel had only begun debate on one amendment to that amendment, which was offered by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, the Democrat of Texas. So again, they came with articles of impeachment. They wouldn't allow a full reading of those articles. That is bizarre to me. And then the chair, maybe they said, well, we won't bother reading them because the chair of the committee has a different set of articles similar to the current one, but we're going to substitute it wholesale. So it doesn't make any sense necessarily to spend time reading this version of the articles of impeachment when we're going to adopt a different one. But then we're not going to read that one either. Okay. So a substitute amendment from Green was not germane. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe, I don't know. Maybe it added something that, I don't know what would make a new set of impeachment articles substituting for an old set of impeachment articles non-germane, but maybe you just try it. Anyway, so I guess they overruled that. They stopped that, and then they said, all right, this substitute amendment, then they probably adopted that substitute amendment on party lines. And then Sheila Jackson Lee said, all right, well, I want to amend the new version. She had a one-line amendment, and she asked the committee clerk to read it in full, which it says is not common. But, I mean, in the context of an impeachment, honestly, you should be reading everything. Panel Republicans likewise rejected her request, but Jackson Lee asked for a roll call vote on, I guess, whether or not to read the thing in full. That prompted Representative Clay Higgins of Louisiana to tell Green, if the minority is going to require that every amendment they offer be read and not dispense with the reading, I say, let them read it. Okay, so case closed. We can be here all night. That's fine with me. All right, wonderful. Representative Dan Goldman, Democrat of New York, replied with a line that made it seem Democrats were planning just that. We look forward to your vote, Goldman said. I guess your vote to allow for the reading. The Jackson Lee amendment would strike the language to impeach Mayorkas for willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law. I'm going to knock out that count from the impeachment indictment, I guess. Early Tuesday, Mayorkas sent a letter to the committee that denied the allegations against him. That seems natural. The secretary pointed to border enforcement statistics, like here's the reality, that included that the Biden administration has removed, returned, or expelled more migrants in 3 years than the Trump administration did in 4 years. Not something necessarily to be proud of, but that's supposed to logic them out of doing what they're doing. I don't know why you even bother. Mayorkas also wrote that he's testified before the House Homeland Security panel 7 times and that DHS has provided more than 13,000 pages of documents and data in response to the committee's requests. But remember, these are the people who are saying, you said I was going to have ice cream. You're a liar. Well, here's 13,000 pages of documents that prove the opposite. I will testify in front of you. It's pointless, but I guess you gotta do that and then point to it and say, look, I'm not the one being unreasonable here. I assure you that your false accusations do not rattle me and do not divert me from the law enforcement and broader public service mission to which I have devoted most of my career and to which I remain devoted, Mayorkas wrote. Also, DHS on Sunday released a memo defending Mayorkas, contending that the current humanitarian parole programs are in step with past ones and that Congress historically hasn't provided the necessary funding to meet migrant detainment requirements, the things that the Republicans say they are demanding. All right. So, I mean, I don't know that was, didn't change anybody's view of what was going on, but it's a little bit more detail. for the claim that the whole thing is a sham and a political stunt. Okay, how so? Well, this is how. All right, let's see. Other things that we ought to consider for the record for today. I'll read you a little bit about this horrible situation with the Pennsylvania young man who declared a revolution and decapitated his father. I have a report from phillyburbs.com, I guess somewhat more local source on this one than the big national news networks. Levittown man. It's a Levittown man, not Long Island, but Pennsylvania. Levittown man charged with beheading father. He posted grisly YouTube video after. This from Joe, J-O, not J-O-E, Ciavaglia, maybe, and J.D. Mullane of the Bucks County Courier-Times. Got it? Okay. A Levittown man who police say beheaded his father, then posted online a grisly video showing the man's severed head while ranting about killing federal government employees, has been charged with homicide, as of course he should be. And remember when that was bad and beheading people and then holding up the heads on videos and distributing them was something that only bad Muslim terrorists did? Well, now we're going to do it too, to show you how something. I'm not certain what. But obviously, a troubled individual, let's say. We have a mental health crisis in this country. Yargle bargle. Justin Mohn, M-O-H-N, I guess, described as the youngest son of the victim, was taken into custody in Fort Indian Town Gap, some 100 miles away from the Upper Orchard Drive home where officers found the decapitated body of his father, Michael Mohn, on Tuesday. He was arraigned on murder charges at midnight and brought back to Bucks County, said Middletown Police Lieutenant Pete Feeney. According to court documents, Justin Mohn used a machete and a large kitchen knife, both found in a bathtub in the home by police, who also recovered the victim's head wrapped in plastic, laying in a large cooking pot. As he's using homemade implements for all of this, he needed to go out and get a special decapitation basket like they had at a guillotine. They should have been more prepared for all of this. Very interesting. Just top to bottom on this one. So this is the youngest son of the victim. I don't know how many kids were in their family, but I guess they wish they were empty nesters now. But one was still hanging around, I guess, and living in the basement and plotting the murder. Yikes. Justin Mohn and his father were the only ones in the home for about 5 hours, according to the affidavit of probable cause. Feeney said police are still putting together a timeline of events, and it remains unclear why Mohn, 32, and still at home, I guess, fled to Fort Indian Town Gap, home of a large National Guard training center. And I guess, I don't know. It sounds like he wasn't passing through Fort Indian Town Gap on his way somewhere else, fleeing, but that he had made that his destination for some reason. And I guess that's what's not clear about it. Okay, there are a lot of unanswered questions, and he's not talking to us about the incident. Well, he's talking, just not about this. That's interesting, too, said Feeney, who was outside the Mohn house just before dawn on Wednesday. I guess he's just ranting to them about his theories about the government. Mohn has also been charged with possession of an instrument of crime. I guess that's a padding for the prosecutors. And abuse of corpse. I mean, okay. You know, I'm not opposed to adding charges to this, obviously. But, wow. It's just weird. Every once in a while you find out. They're like, well, if I can't prove that he, did all of these things, I don't know. But I guess you can just pad things. Yeah, now he's arraigned on 15 charges, which sounds like you're taking it more seriously than if he's arraigned on 2. What? He decapitated his father. Well, how many charges do you want? He's charged with murder and, some other thing. Why do we have to add all this on? I don't know. Other charges may be filed later Wednesday. He's lodged in Bucks County Jail, Feeney said. We got called to the home, and officers went in and discovered the father upstairs, deceased. Middletown Police Department Chief Joseph Barteria said outside the crime scene late Tuesday night. I don't know whether it's Barbarella or Barteria, but probably in Pennsylvania, Barbarella. On Wednesday morning, police confirmed Michael Moan, 68, was beheaded as his son told the world he did it in a YouTube video the day before. Justin Moan posted the 14-minute video to YouTube around 5:30 p.m. Tuesday. In it, Moan holds up a decapitated head wrapped in plastic and claims it is his father. I wish that had been faked. A federal employee of more than 20 years, allegedly. We don't know. This is something that Greg brought up. I mean, we're taking the word of a lunatic for this. He described his father as a traitor in his violent anti-government ramblings on the video. There's a link to, I guess, one of their other pieces on, who is this guy and what was he up to. Apparently, he has, in the past, sued the government over something and was a bit of an amateur musician, in case that matters. Police were called to the neat, green-shuttered Jubilee-style house. I don't even know what Jubilee-style is. There's a picture, but okay. About 7 p.m. on Tuesday, Justin Moan's mother, Denise, had returned home and found her husband's body. Her screams caused at least one neighbor to call police. Feeney said, well, good idea, because they were needed. He is now in hell for eternity as a traitor to his country, Justin Moan says of his father on the video, which appeared to be filmed in a bedroom. Where else? In the video, Moan describes himself as the commander, quote-unquote, commander of America's national network of militia, in case you thought it was a waste of time for me to read to you about the weird militia movement on here in Virginia. Although this is a weirder one than most. He called his network of militia Moan's Militia. Well, what else is he going to name it? Also, that was the title of his YouTube channel, by the way, which had 15 subscribers, who should all maybe be looked in on, and 8 videos as of Tuesday night. The video had more than 5,000 views before YouTube took it down, citing violations of the platform's policy on violent and graphic content. Hello. Finally, the video, reviewed by this news organization, includes a manifesto-style rant in which Moan calls on his followers, 15 of them, to take action against federal employees. It is titled, Call to Arms for American Patriots. So, yes, people who style themselves American Patriots doing ISIS-style beheading videos now. The aftermath of Levittown beheading appears on video is the next section. I think I knew that. After holding up his father's severed head, I apologize for all this, by the way, for morning content. He says he now controls and commands America's police and military. This is going to end up in a non-compos mentis plea at some point, and calls for the execution of federal employees and puts bounties on the FBI director, the attorney general, and the chief Supreme Court justice, or what we would call in America the chief justice of the Supreme Court. He's probably got less money for these bounties than Donald Trump does at this point, and Donald Trump has 0. He rails against the LGBTQ community, of course, 'cause that's required, the Black Lives Matter movement, and terrorist organizations such as Antifa, as he puts it, anti-fa. He adds a hyphen in there. And hate those terrorist organizations. How much? Enough to behead my own dad and make a video of it. He calls for the seizure of federal buildings and says federal employees should be publicly executed for betraying their country. Moan also says his call to action is only aimed at federal employees and says state employees and officials should be left unharmed. We're getting contacted by some people in the community that know us and know him and his family, and we're hearing a lot. Obviously, he's well known in the community just by the calls we're getting, which is unusual because usually they're shy, quiet loners that mostly kept to themselves, right? Feeney said Middletown has had several contacts with Justin Moan over the years, but nothing serious or criminal. They'll all say they couldn't see it coming, I guess. All right. It's grisly. It really happened. We'll probably be talking about it. I don't know if they'll be talking about it as much as we talk about Taylor Swift, but there it is. Okay. There was more that I wanted to get to in the last section of Thomas Zimmer's Substack entry that we read yesterday. It was written the day before yesterday, but remember, this was the Texas border standoff. being an acute crisis with terrifying implications. As a reminder, we'll read you, I guess, the subheader and then the section headings as we went along, and then finish up the third point he was trying to make about this whole thing. Asking in his subheader, is this how America ends? Echoes of nullification crises and civil war and the dissolution of the Union. Remember that, of course, he's talking about Abbott's stance in defiance, maybe sort of, kind of, depending on how you look at it, of the Supreme Court orders. But as Joan pointed out, the Supreme Court didn't order the razor wire taken down. They merely held that federal authorities had the right, it was within their prerogative to cut through that wire in order to access the federal border. It doesn't mean that Texas can't reassemble that barrier, but they will have no grounds on which to sue for any sort of recovery from any federal officials who cut their way through in order to make access to the border. So let's see. We were updated on all the Republican governors who joined in a letter of support. Is it simply, is it meaningless, or do they really mean to nullify Supreme Court orders themselves at some point? No one really knows. He then details how we got here with Abbott in 2021 announcing Operation Lone Star, right? A broad-scale offensive against the smuggling of people and drugs into Texas, and using state officialdom to try to enforce border law, which is pretty clearly and constitutionally the prerogative of the federal government. And then the discussion of neo-Confederate legal theories behind this. And along the way, he cited a couple of sources who had written clearly, in his view, on each of these things. The How We Got Here section depended largely on the Washington Post's Philip Bump and his excellent timeline of the events that got us where we are today. The second section on neo-Confederate legal theories, he pointed to Mark Joseph Stern, who had a great breakdown of why the legal and constitutional case that Texas is advancing does not hold up to scrutiny. And I think here we got about as far as, they said that there were two pillars of this constitutional theory that doesn't hold up. The first being the idea that Texas is being invaded, right? That this is an invasion that therefore entitles Texas constitutionally, in their view, to invoke their right to self-defense, but it is not by any means. In the same vein that we were discussing earlier with the amicus brief from the historians about what is and isn't an insurrection, there's a question of what is and isn't an invasion, and no evidence so far, and there won't be any either because it's not likely to exist logically, that immigration would have been viewed as an invasion, particularly as the invasion forces are friendly to the U.S., so much so that they wanted to come here and live here and obey, if not our immigration laws necessarily, then every other law that they would be permitted to live under. Just make a new life for themselves and be law-abiding citizens once they get here. Naturally, Republicans and conservatives would say, well, no, that's an upside down and back. That's a very naive interpretation. They want to come here to be criminals, which they could be anywhere, but specifically they're interested in becoming criminals here in the United States. That's their view. The second pillar of these neo-Confederate arguments is that Texas is invoking the so-called compact theory that was essentially what underlay the secession of the states in the Civil War, that we have the option of leaving if the Union isn't serving our interests, then the compact between the states and the federal government is broken and we can leave at will. And then he moved on to the next section, that this isn't just noise, it's a real crisis. And we did read that section. That led us to the end of our time for consideration of this article yesterday. So now we'll, I guess, be able to get to the exciting conclusion of this after the break. I'll just remind you a little bit of what do you mean by this isn't just noise, it's a real crisis. This was, of course, where the white reactionary assault on multiracial, pluralistic democracy and constitutional government is happening on so many fronts simultaneously, and MAGA America and its leaders it's one leader, are producing so much noise at all times that it's easy to lose sight of how things are connected, of what matters and what doesn't. This border conflict matters greatly and is greatly concerning for at least three main reasons. And he gave the first two reasons in this section. The third reason was reserved for the next section. The first reason, the lives of real human beings are at stake. The second reason, the border plays an enormously important role in the collective right-wing imagination, and propagating the idea of an invasion is to their benefit, I suppose. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's get to the conclusion then of the Zimmer article. There's about 10,000 things that I want to try to cram in after that, and I will get to maybe one. It's important to hear from Thomas Zimmer. So again, there were three basic reasons why this was such a big concern. The first was white reactionary assault on multiracial, pluralistic democracy, etc., and that MAGA and its leader are producing so much noise at all times, it's hard to see how things are connected. The first reason that this is a big deal, human lives at stake. The second reason, the invasion logic and what it means to them as a means to rally their troops in the election, and whatever other actions they might take along the way, wink, wink, insurrection, beheadings, what have you. Scaremongering about an invasion of dangerous non-white people at the border is not something Trump introduced. It's been a fixture of the far right for decades, and every time some immigration deal to solve whatever problem there might be seems within reach, it has been the radical right sabotaging it. They are doing so again right now before our very eyes. And let's see. Lastly, yes, much of the standoff between Texas and the other Republican governors around the country who say they support them, but right now it's just the letters, and I don't know how many of them really, like, what opportunity has Glenn Youngkin got to face off with the federal government about the border? None, really, but will he find something else to face off with them about or not? We'll see. Well, Abbott believes he'll benefit from this crisis politically, but underneath the cynicism and opportunism is also a dimension of ideological conviction, a sincerely held, maybe, worldview in which real America, to the right, you see, is only conceivable as a nation dominated by white Christians, and that nation is under threat from without, invasion, illegals, and the caravans, and within, from the left, the socialists, communists, the liberals who want to destroy everything America is supposed to be, like when the big famous cheerleadery pop star goes out with the big famous football star guy. That's the awful stuff, right? We got to get rid of that. Oh, and Bud Light. Anyway, But yes, this is what they're trying to do. Fight against the liberals who want to destroy everything America is supposed to be and make it into something it must never become, a godforsaken place of multiracial pluralism. Those who are in charge on the right truly believe that the federal government is dominated by these un-American enemies and that it has conspired against real America since at least the civil rights legislation of the 1960s. Ideology and opportunism reinforcing each other in specific and dangerous ways. Now the big conclusion, red America versus blue America, a country falling apart. That third reason, that aforementioned third reason, this is not some isolated incident. It is part of a much bigger story and has to be seen in the broader context of the country falling apart. In general, I don't like the new Civil War terminology all that much. Too often it suggests a simple repeat of the past, and that's not how history works, ever, says the historian. Such notions underestimate how specific the constellation of the mid-19th century was. The conflict over slavery defining the country's institutions, economy, political economy, and culture that led to deep division escalating to secession and civil war. Today's situation doesn't easily lend itself to the formation of two contiguous power blocks. The country's political geography, for instance, is defined much more by an urban-rural divide than a conflict between North and South. But as much as I am professionally obligated to caution against facile historical analogies, Republican states are right now openly and aggressively endorsing the argument that led this country into a civil war. There are, at the very least, some very concerning echoes, and more importantly, there are powerful traditions and continuities. Republican governors are proudly taking up the states' rights, and that's in quotes, mantle to defy the federal government. On the level of the underlying political project and vision of what America should be, there is a fairly direct line from the secession of slave states to today's neo-Confederate use of the compact theory as a way to justify the cruel crackdown on an invasion of people of color. And as much as the Civil War analogy may tend to invoke misleading associations, it can actually be helpful if it alerts people to the seriousness of the situation and to the prospect of violence. Because the fact that we will not get a rematch between vast armies dressed in blue and gray meeting on the battlefield does not mean the current situation isn't extremely volatile and dangerous, or that there won't be violence. There is likely going to be a lot more political violence. The gap between red America and blue America is rapidly widening. The country has been falling apart into a multiracial, pluralistic blue part that accepts changing social, cultural, and demographic realities versus a red part that is led by patriarchal white nationalists entirely devoted to rolling back those changes. In many ways, this actually constitutes a return to a constellation that defined American politics before the 1960s. An authoritarian movement entrenching white supremacy in a number of states while also shaping and or obstructing national policy. Unlike in previous eras of U.S. history, however, the idea of America as a nation of and for white Christians, the ideology of white Christian superiority, now clearly lacks majority support. Those who adhere to what they perceive as the natural and or divinely ordained order, defined by discriminatory hierarchies of race, gender, wealth, and religion, understand this clearly. That is precisely why they have entirely given up on democratic politics. They can't win it. They're not a majority. And instead seek to impose their vision on the country via minority rule. The fact that a shrinking minority of white conservatives is consistently being enabled to hold on to power against the will of the majority of voters is causing a legitimacy crisis that is bound to get a lot worse. I guess another way of saying this, there's another theme in this underlying all of it is there might be, in fact, legitimate reason for the majority to say our institutions are worthless to the extent that they prop up the opposite of what should obviously democratically be happening here. So they may have claims of their own for a division of the spoils, I suppose. This situation will have to be resolved one way or another. Have I skipped the sentence here? No, I don't think so. This situation will have to be resolved one way or another. Some form of stability can only be achieved by either overcoming reactionary minority rule or through ever more oppressive measures. In Texas, Greg Abbott is currently demonstrating how Republicans intend to resolve this situation by authoritarian rule, nullification of federal authority, and open rebellion against the government of the United States that they perceive to be dominated by un-American forces and therefore fundamentally illegitimate. This must lead to instability and dysfunction, constitutional crises, and ultimately violence. Will this particular standoff at the Texas border escalate into the type of crisis that takes an already volatile political situation to a whole different level? Maybe not. But it's frighteningly easy to see how it might be a milestone in a series of events that leads to a really dark place. And that's it for that entry. I don't know whether we're now one behind and whether there's more from Zimmer at this point. No, not quite yet. That's still the first one up at the top. So, okay, just wanted to sort of set the stage there, and Zimmer's thoughts are usually pretty organized and helpful in doing so. Let's see. Maybe we'll hold on to this one for a little while, but yet another amicus brief in the 14th Amendment fight that is of some note. I think we've mentioned it. It includes Judge Michael Ludwig in the mix here for this one. Everybody entering amicus brief, amici briefs. That's the plural for this case. Very interesting, and they all make slightly different and interesting points along the way. So it's been fun to read through them, although they are kind of lengthy entries and all of this stuff. Okay, let's see. A few other things that I thought might be worth including are interspersed all over the place here. But let me head back to Pocket and see what else we can shoehorn in our last segment here. Oh yes. Wow. There are many. Shall we try this one? Maybe. Why not? This will require just a little bit of untangling and might consume the rest of the day. But you may have heard this story the other day. I recall seeing it in passing and wondering, what gives with this? I saw lots of people getting upset with this because there was a report that I guess former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi had found herself targeted for protest from people calling for a ceasefire, but from a pro-Palestinian perspective. There's differences, obviously, out there. But she was confronted by a group of protesters who I guess were defined somehow as pro-Palestinian in nature, and it's never all that clear whether they're simply ceasefire advocates or in fact pro-Palestinian advocates. And there's overlap, and there's reason to expect both at the same sort of protest as well. So I don't know, but Pelosi did, to characterize the entirety of the protest as pro-Palestinian and therefore somehow inherently invalid, and that naturally angered a lot of people who are, there's a growing number of progressives and liberals who see the situation from an explicitly pro-Palestinian viewpoint, and then still plenty who simply say, even from a neutral standpoint, there ought to be a ceasefire. And now an increasingly a number of people who see it from a Israeli, or at least sympathetic to Israeli viewpoint, who still say it's actually in the interest of the state of Israel, even if it's not to the benefit of this government in Israel, to call for a ceasefire. That should not be lost in all of this. But here's the deal. So she snapped at them and yelled at them and came up with something that sounded rather loony to most people, including me at the outset. Pelosi faces backlash for demanding swarming protesters. I am reading from Fox News here, believe it or not. Go back to China. And then, of course, a response, I guess, from somebody else saying slanderous accusations, that this is a slanderous accusation to connect them with China. And it did seem like weird and dumb, and probably people somewhat disconnected from the story like me were saying, China. And people inclined to dislike Nancy Pelosi, which I wouldn't number myself among, probably thought, well, you know, she's getting pretty old. She may be a little bit confused. Go back to China. What does that mean? Well, it happened. And as it turns out, yesterday I saw circulated a story that says, well, there might be something to that. What could it possibly be? Now, I'm reading from Fox News because it wasn't a widely reported incident in terms of the number and variety of outlets that covered it. And a lot of the choices besides Fox News were places that are focused on the Palestinian crisis. And it wasn't all that helpful to use them as a source for this story, though they were relating the same event. But the Fox News version will give you the flavor of it. Former House Speaker links pro-Palestinian protesters to Russia, which also doesn't help unconfuse the situation. Go back to China. How are they linked to Russia? Well, we're just going to have to make our way through this because there is something to this that needs to be understood, I think. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was blasted on social media after a video surfaced from October in which she told pro-Palestinian protesters from Code Pink to go back to China, where their headquarters is. Because last time I heard about or cared about Code Pink, they were protesting the Iraq War, and it made a lot more sense. Even if their tactics didn't, to some people, it made some kind of inherent sense. Okay, they're anti-war, so sure, they're doing this thing. Go back to China where their headquarters is. No, my recollection is that the Code Pink people, though I didn't necessarily agree with them on everything they were doing, were not Chinese. They were American. What are you talking about? And how is China Russia? And what does it have to do with Palestine? I have no idea. So we wanted to look into this. So this is all the way back in October. In October, Pelosi told our members calling for a ceasefire to go back to China. Code Pink posted on Twitter on Monday, along with a video of Pelosi interacting with protesters. Why it took so long to get the October video onto Twitter, I have no idea. These same women have been protesting for peace at her house for 17 years. Pelosi takes thousands of dollars from AIPAC every year. Who's the foreign agent here is the counter accusation that they level. But yeah, they've been protesting for peace for 17 years. And so you might expect that they might be involved in ceasefire protesting now. What makes her so mad about it? I wonder. Well, social media users criticized Pelosi, including Trending Politics co-owner Colin Rugg, never heard of him, who posted on Twitter that Pelosi has, quote, lost it. And I mean, you know, it was a conclusion I could see people coming to if all that gets reported is go back to China where your headquarters is. Pelosi is making Joe McCarthy look like a model of restraint and consistency. Jonathan Turley, oh boy, a constitutional law professor and Fox News contributor, posted on Twitter. Imagine the reaction if a Republican said what Nancy Pelosi said. GOP operative Steve Guest said, if we couldn't even say that the Yargo Bargo COVID virus was from China, I expect every news agency in America to interrogate Pelosi for her racism. Mark Hemingway, a senior writer at Real Clear Investigations, did you know there was one, posted on Twitter. Pelosi was presumably referring to a New York Times report tying Code Pink to a Chinese propaganda network. This week, Pelosi suggested that protesters calling for a ceasefire in Gaza are connected to Russia. Well, okay. They are in front of my house all the time, Pelosi said to CNN. I have a feeling for what feelings they have, but we have to think about what we're doing, and we have to do, what we have to do is try to stop the suffering in Gaza. This is women and children, people who don't have a place to go to, so let's address that. But for them to call for a ceasefire is Mr. Putin's message. Mr. Putin's message, she says again. Okay? Make no mistake, this is directly connected to what what he would like to see. Same thing with Ukraine. It's about Putin's message. I think some of these protesters are spontaneous and organic and sincere. Some, I think, are connected to Russia. I say that having looked at this for a long time. Fox News Digital reached out to Pelosi's office for comment, didn't get any response. The idea that we are Chinese propaganda is a false distraction used by both sides of the aisle to discredit our legitimacy as an anti-war organization. Code Pink spokesperson Melissa Garriga told Fox News Digital they both feel it's necessary to use such slanderous accusations because they are scared of the real truth, are they? Which is that Americans are over the military-industrial complex, we are not, and want an end to foreign wars, they may, and American imperialism. Mixed feelings on that one, I think, out there generally. We would like to see the Democrats and Republicans and independents, but they're only parenthetical, end the funding of the current genocide and Israel's 75-year-long occupation of Palestine. Code Pink also put out a press release on Monday addressing the incident with Pelosi. So like I said, there was something to it, and that there was a reference, in fact, to a New York Times investigation. There really was such a connection. Now, I had put aside, in addition to this, a similar report, which, I was just wondering. I must have gotten through it through a different conduit, but it was, in fact, this New York Times piece. And it's a rather lengthy one, and it's kind of interesting, and maybe we take a look. It doesn't necessarily mean that the call for ceasefire is less important or interesting or valid, but it clears up the, hey, she's gone bonkers stuff, perhaps, or at least gives us an explanation, because there is some weird stuff going on here. A global web of Chinese propaganda leads to a U.S. tech mogul. Of course it does. The Times unraveled a financial network that stretches from Chicago to Shanghai and uses American nonprofits to push Chinese talking points worldwide. The big mystery is why there's no country in the world that supports, through a network of nonprofits, speaking about things from a progressive but American viewpoint on, say, podcasts 5 days a week for 2 hours at a time. The report from, here we go, Mara Hvistendal, I guess would probably be my better attempt without the H sound, even though it begins with an H, and a more familiar name, David Farenthold, reporting on this as well, which actually, this was kind of a far-fetched sounding story, but the involvement of David Farenthold gave me pause, and, I kind of want to hear what he has to say about these things. Lindsay Chutel, Chutel, and Ishan Javeri have joined in this as well. And in case you need to know more about them, there's a little bit more in the fine print here. But David Farenthold's name you ought to remember. The protest, it begins, in London's bustling Chinatown, brought together a variety of activist groups to oppose a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. So, it was peculiar when a street brawl broke out among mostly ethnic Chinese demonstrators. Witnesses said the fight in November of 2021 started when men aligned with the event's organizers, including a group called No Cold War, attacked activists supporting the democracy movement in Hong Kong. On the surface, No Cold War is a loose collective run mostly by American and British activists who say the West's rhetoric against China has distracted from issues like climate change and racial injustice. Maybe tenable. Okay. In fact, a New York Times investigation found it is part of a lavishly funded, damn it, why do they always get lavishly funded, influence campaign that defends China and pushes its propaganda. You had to figure they were doing something like this, right? They're a pretty big country. At the center is a charismatic American millionaire, Neville Roy Singham, who is known as a socialist benefactor of far-left causes. All right. a multimillionaire socialist. Great. What is less known and is hidden amid a tangle of nonprofit groups and shell companies, is that Mr. Singham works closely with the Chinese government media machine and is financing its propaganda worldwide. Just as odd, communist China allowing an American millionaire to fund their efforts. From a think tank in Massachusetts to an event space in Manhattan, from a political party in South Africa to news organizations in India and Brazil, strangely confined to the BRICS countries here. The Times tracked hundreds of millions of dollars to groups linked to Mr. Singham that mix progressive advocacy with Chinese government talking points. Progressive advocacy, good. Chinese government talking points, not great. So, some, like No Cold War, popped up in recent years. Others, like the American anti-war group Code Pink, have morphed over time. And here's the part of the story I had missed in all of this. I heard about them in Iraq, and then not again for years until just now. What happened? Code Pink once criticized China's human rights records. It doesn't say human, but that's what they mean. Rights records. But now defends its internment of the predominantly Muslim Uyghurs, which human rights experts have labeled a crime against humanity. That's a change I haven't heard much about. Code Pink somehow became defenders of internment of the Muslim Uyghurs in China. That doesn't seem like it could possibly be squared with their philosophy and approach to things, generally speaking. But I guess they have. That's weird. These groups are funded through American nonprofits flush with at least $275 million in donations. Where is my part of that? But Mr. Singham, 69, himself sits in Shanghai, where one outlet in his network is co-producing a YouTube show financed in part by the city's of Shanghai's propaganda department. How does that even happen? Two others are working with a Chinese university to, quote, spread China's voice to the world, unquote. And last month, Mr. Singham joined a Communist Party workshop about promoting the party internationally. Mr. Singham says he does not work at the direction of the Chinese government, but the line between him and the propaganda apparatus is so blurry that he shares office space and his group shares staff members with a company whose goal is to educate foreigners about, quote, the miracles that China has created on the world stage, unquote. That's some weird phrasing. Years of research have shown how disinformation, both homegrown and foreign-backed, influences mainstream conservative discourse. Now we're into conservative discourse for the Chinese, American, sort of maybe socialist, communist guy, what have you, with his progressive network. Mr. Singham's network shows what that process looks like on the left. Gosh. Well, he and his allies are on the front line of what the Communist Party officials call a smokeless war. That's their terminology for it, I guess Cold War, but okay. Under the rule of Xi Jinping, I never will get that right, China has expanded state media operations, teamed up with overseas outlets, and cultivated foreign influencers. The goal is to disguise propaganda as independent content. Mr. Singham's groups have produced YouTube videos that together racked up millions of views. They also seek to influence real-world politics by meeting with congressional aides, training politicians in Africa, running candidates in South African elections, and organizing protests like the one in London that erupted into violence. The result is a seemingly organic bloom of far-left groups that echo Chinese government talking points, echo one another, and are echoed in turn by the Chinese state media. Because the network is built on the back of American nonprofit groups, tax experts say, Mr. Singham may have been eligible for tax deductions for his donations. The Times untangled the web of charities and shell companies using nonprofit and corporate filings, internal documents, and interviews with over 24 former employees of groups linked to Mr. Singham. Some groups, including No Cold War, do not seem to exist as legal entities, but are tied to the network through domain registration records and shared organizers. None of Mr. Singham's nonprofits have registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, as is required of groups that seek to influence public opinion on behalf of foreign powers. That usually applies to groups taking money or orders from foreign governments. Legal experts said Mr. Singham's network was an unusual case. Most of the groups in Mr. Singham's network declined to answer questions from the Times. 3 said they had never received money or instructions from a foreign government or political party. Speculation about Mr. Singham first emerged on Twitter among self-described anti-fascists, believe it or not, who you would think might be aligned with his goals ordinarily. Reports followed in the publication New Lines, and the South African investigative outlet, I can't even tell you how to pronounce that, Ama Bungane is my best guess at that one. The authorities in India raided a news organization tied to Mr. Singham during a crackdown on the press, accusing it of having ties to the Chinese government, but offering no proof. That ain't good. The Times investigation is the first to unravel the funding and document Mr. Singham's ties to Chinese propaganda interests. And that's what they then set out to do over the next, 20 minutes to half an hour's worth of reading for the end of this. It's really quite fascinating. I just wanted to sort of bring it up just because I noticed the backlash against Pelosi, which may or may not be deserved, but just so that you didn't think that she was, or that you didn't think there was no kernel of truth somewhere to the otherwise weird-sounding reaction that she gave to the protesters. It turns out, well, there was. Does that necessarily mean that the protesters are wrong? No. Does it necessarily mean the protesters shouldn't be at her house? Well, that's a different question you can answer on your own. But I guess they're entitled to do that. She's tolerated it for years up to this point. But was there no connection to China whatsoever? Turns out maybe there was.
You have been listening
How odd.
to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Definitely an odd progression on the Code Pink front, though I was never a big fan anyway, so it's easy to believe, even if it's a made-up story. But I'll try and wade through the rest of it, and then, of course, that gives us Thursday and Friday to unravel other mysteries contributing to the mess that Thomas Zimmer has described. But first, Justice Putnam attempts to unravel those mysteries himself. Next.